So I remember the first memory. I mean, when you're going to Africa, you think, all it is huts and people living in the jungle or whatever you seem to think you see on National Geographic. But you actually get there and the airport's actually pretty nice. They built a nice new airport, so you get there and you're a little surprised to see that they have a lot of the amenities that we have in the U.S. So the city is actually pretty large. The Harare, the capital. So you get there and you start to realize there's a lot of similarities than you might have thought about Africa beforehand. The British established Zimbabwe, so they did a really good job of establishing their infrastructures of sewer systems and transportation areas. So the cities are laid out pretty well because of the British. Where other parts of Africa, it's different because they didn't have the settlement of the British that did so well on mapping out a city. So you'll start to see it actually is pretty, normal looking. You'll start to, in Zimbabwe and in Africa in general, you have basically two classes of people. The upper class live in neighborhoods that they call low density. Those houses are usually about ½ acre to an acre, sometimes larger. They have what they call dura walls. They're about, 8 to 12 feet high. So you find that a lot, and most third world countries have similar circumstances. And then the high density areas are where the low income people, which is a majority, probably I think 90% of the people live in the high density. And those are called townships. And the townships were established as well by the British to help with this. They had the segregation of the blacks from the whites, whereas now that's all mixed in. So you have blacks now living in the low density because most of the whites have left Zimbabwe. But that's something you'll notice real quick is that the low density neighborhoods, it's kind of like you're in a home, anywhere else in the world. It's a suburban area. But the high density areas are very different because, you're living in places with tin roofs, even asbestos roofs. There's usually not, in these high density areas, there's usually not anything between you and the rafters. So it's just an empty room. There's not a ceiling. It's usually just made out of brick. They don't build their houses out of wood. So then the yards are very unkept. They're usually dirt. No one has grass unless it's in those high income areas. So yeah, that's the first thing you kind of notice is start to say, all right, what's the differences? The class differences is huge for you. The other thing was the first time that I usually travel in what they call commuter buses. And it's about the size of a Toyota minivan, one of the older, more square bread box type looking minivans. They usually put 3 people in the front, or 2 people in the front next to the driver. So there's 3 in the front, and then you usually have 4 to 5 rows of seats, and they put 4 people in each seat. So driving becomes very different because you're in a very cramped, condensed area. And it doesn't matter how big the people are, they still have to fit 4 people on a row. So you get used to being crunched, especially if you're a larger size, like I'm 6'5", so it was really hard for me to ride in those smaller buses. So it was the first times I went into downtown, not in the mission office and not with lots of elders at the mission home, as I actually went into the downtown urban area where the capital was. The first thing that shocked me was the fact that you look into the sea of people that's downtown, and for the first time you don't see anybody of a Latino descent, you don't see any Caucasian people. It's straight African people living is what you should expect, but it kind of caught me off guard to see all African people and not see a single white person. So that was a little bit shocking for me, but luckily didn't take too long to get over that. The most important thing for you to do is, especially for Americans going to Zimbabwe or Americans going to any other foreign country, is to realize America is America and the other country, like Zimbabwe, is its own country. So the things that we do in America, we don't necessarily need to say that they're better, or America's run better, or that Americans are smarter, or everything's run better in America, because it kind of hurts feelings. So I've noticed amongst the missionaries coming in, including myself, if I sat there and tried to tell, oh, well, in America we do this, in America we do that, but it becomes almost prideful and boastful because, America is what it is, and people need to be told that their country is not as good as America. So I quickly noticed that they wanted to be proud of their country, and they don't need to be told that their country is not as good as the U.S. So I quickly learned that for me to touch hearts with the Zimbabweans was to love their country and respect their country, and to see the good things about their country and the good things about their culture and how unique their culture is, and start to learn about those things. And as soon as I started doing that in my first few weeks, my heart started to change and started realizing, like, yeah, I'm not in the United States anymore, and that's going to be okay. And I'm in Zimbabwe, and that's a great thing, because this is what I wanted. Ultimately, I wanted to go to a different country. I wanted to live around different people. I wanted to experience different things. And so really appreciate that experience, like I talked about earlier. Appreciate that you get to serve the Lord in a place that you probably never imagined that you would go to. So that's kind of the first experiences I had, was just the difference of how the people broke out, how the communities are developed, the strong British influence. The British English that they speak is different. Their accents are very different. Even the first Sunday that I was at church, I sat there in sacrament meeting, and I couldn't understand a single thing that they were saying. Maybe not a single, but I couldn't understand the talk that was being given. It was in English, but their accent was so thick. And then it's also mixed with British, so you have this British African accent, which, I couldn't understand my first week or two. So you'll start to realize that they talk differently. And my wife even made fun of me when I got home because I talked differently like them. So you'll notice the difference in the language. You will have a major shock if you go to a high density area first, just because the living standards are much lower. But if you're lucky, you might go to a low density area first where the higher living standards are there. It's more like a suburban neighborhood. So I noticed that a lot of missionaries that went to the high density areas first usually had a little bit more of an adjustment time. The British came into Africa. So Cecil Rhodes was down in South Africa. The Dutch and the British had kind of formed South Africa, and Cecil Rhodes wanted to start to kind of colonize more parts of Africa. So Cecil Rhodes went north, and he went up into what is now Zimbabwe and Zambia, which then was called Southern Rhodesia and Northern Rhodesia. And then Malawi, was called Nyasa land. And then when the British kind of control had come to an end in the late 70s, and different times for different countries, but Zimbabwe and Zambia were in 82, I think it was Zimbabwe's independence, and that's when they kind of broke off and became their own country and changed the name from Rhodesia to Zimbabwe. Most of the cities were also renamed as well, whereas Harare is not the original name of the city. So you'll find that. You'll see there's different cities, their sewer, what do you call them? Sewer lids. They'll have the actual original names of the cities on there. So you'll see that because of that war between the blacks and the whites, there's a pretty strong dislike for whites in general when you get to Africa, because the government, the whites didn't treat the blacks very kindly. They had an apartheid system like they had in South Africa. They treated them pretty poorly. They treated them almost as slaves, even though they did pay them and give them food and stuff. But so there's a lot of resentment of that lifestyle carried over after Zimbabwe was able to gain their independence. The president of Zimbabwe is President Mugabe. He had pretty good intentions originally to give the country independence, but in the time being, he's kind of done a lot of things that are pretty awful. He's kind of single-handedly destroyed the country. When I got there in 2001, the country's economy was falling apart. In the 80s, the Zim dollar and the Rhodesian currency were actually valued more than the British pound. So when I got there, the currency was about, for every US dollar, you'd get about 250 Zim dollars. When I left, it was one US dollar to, I believe, about $30,000. And then in sequential years, the currency had not just gone into inflation, they call it hyperflation, to where it was getting $1 to $1 trillion. So actually I have some missionaries that were there after me, and they brought me back $1 trillion Zim dollar notes. So the country's economy is in a wreck. And this is what's caused so much humility among the people, is they really don't know if they'll have a plate of food tomorrow, because the country is in turmoil. The government also has a very strong army and police force. So people aren't allowed to have weapons. And so the people aren't able to revolt, or else you probably see more of a revolt among the Zimbabweans like you see in Eastern Africa, where they have a lot of civil wars, and even up in Western Africa, in Uganda and places like that, where the people revolt more. But I think it's almost, a blessing for the gospel to go there, because even though the people can't revolt and they can't arm themselves, they're very, very humble. And I almost wonder if they had weapons, if they would revolt, because the Zimbabweans are a very humble people, and they're a very loving people. So you'll see that quickly, that if you are a white person, they don't come across very many Americans or Europeans. They come across some white Africans or Rhodesians, but there's a pretty strong hatred there. So the first thing you're trying to do is break down that barrier of, hey, yeah, I'm a white person, or I'm a European, or even you had Polynesians, elders that were there to help them understand that, yes, I'm here, but I'm also here for the gospel, to talk about Jesus. I'm not from around here. If you establish those things to help break down the walls and show humility to them, even learning their native tongue, just greetings, really helps them to understand that you care about them, because you're speaking their language. Even though the church wants you to speak and teach in English, it's very nice for them to know that you care enough about their country to learn their language, at least to greet them in their language. So in the 90s, President Mugabe started to do what he called land reform. The whites had established, as I had mentioned before, they'd done a pretty good job at establishing the infrastructures of the country. Very good sewer systems, the water's very clean, the roads are very well, everything was kept very, very clean. So as Mugabe took over and started kicking the whites out, and the whites were leaving on their own terms, in the 90s he started to do this land reform, where he'd go and take these farms over and take them back from the whites, because he felt it was their land, which, I don't, decipher if he does or does not have the reason to do that. But he took these farms back, but then he put on kind of his cronies or his friends to run these massive farms, because Zimbabwe was called the breadbasket of Africa. It's such a fertile land that it was actually able to supply the entire southern hemisphere of Africa itself. It's kind of like the Great Plains of the U.S. It's a very fertile land, but you have to know how to farm that with irrigation and such. So as President Mugabe kicked the whites off their farms and did this pretty hostilely, he took what he called war vets from the Zimbabwean, Rhodesian War, and would take them over hostilely. And, because of course the whites didn't want to necessarily give up their farm. So they go in there and, a lot of times it was done forcefully. So as he put his, war vet friends on these farms that didn't know how to farm, the country's resources were now being depleted to where they stopped exporting goods. So this causes the hyperinflation, because they now have no exports. So now it's gotten to the point where there's pretty much no white farms that are owned. It's all owned by the natives. But unfortunately, they haven't been able to keep those farms producing. So now Zimbabwe is barely able to produce enough food for itself. So there's a lot of foreign aid there. When I was a missionary, the country started running out of food. So you'll see food shortages. Hopefully they've stopped having those, but it got so bad while I was there that the church had to start flying in food boxes from LDS charities that were full of rice and beans, because we really couldn't even go to a store and buy food. So that was pretty hard to go through those experiences, to see people literally, starving for lack of food. So the church has been pretty instrumental in trying to help establish wells and teach the people how to farm their own lands and kind of create a community farming system for them. So that's kind of what's going on now, and that's why the economy has crashed, is because of the takeover from one power to another. And that's why there's so much poverty there. just because of the president lives in a palace in Harare and kind of hoards all the money. They have a strong tobacco product that they try to export, so they do export tobacco and things like that as well, but even that's been diminished since they've taken over the farms of tobacco. There's a lot of minerals there. They used to act like there wasn't diamonds in Zimbabwe, but forever we used to wonder how was the army able to produce and to have enough infantry and cars, and because the government has very nice vehicles, and you wonder how does this happen, the people have nothing. But it turns out they actually do have diamonds in Zimbabwe that they've been kind of keeping hush-hush so that people wouldn't try to come in and raid these diamond mines. So that's more in the mountainous areas in the eastern part of Zimbabwe. So there's a lot of turmoil when you go there when it comes to politicalness or political parties. It's kind of strange. You'll quickly notice that, for instance, in the U.S. you have Republicans and Democrats, which is a political party, but to there, it gets to the point like during election times, it becomes violent to where these political parties are more like gangs. So the current party in power with the president is called ZANU-PF, and they actually have the teenagers and the 20-year-old kids and the police go out together, and they would attack anybody that was in the opposition of that political party. So during those times, the church would pull us out of our areas, especially during the presidential elections. And you'd be locked up in your house for a couple weeks during these political times, because if you were a white person or you were a foreign person in these towns, either white or black, even, you'll have a lot of companions that are South African or Ugandan or Kenyan or Nigerian that are your companions. Even them being foreigners, they didn't like to see foreigners in their country during this political time. So it was really, really strange to come from, being an American, to come to a place where political struggle is real, and that it's violent, and that people are beaten, and you see all the time people are scared to even say if they're a member of a different party. So it's kind of like, like I said, it's really like two gangs fighting politically over the people. And so you quickly have to realize you can't become politically involved, and that you're there for Christ. And that even if you do feel that someone's in the wrong or the president's in the wrong, it doesn't matter, because all you're there is to talk about Christ and share about Christ. And the greatest thing that you can do for that country is to help establish the church, because the church enables and it empowers people, and it educates people to make changes. So that's why it's so great to be able to be a missionary for those people, to really change their lives. When I got to Malawi, Malawi had been open for missionaries for about 4 years, but the growth was very, very slow. When I got there, there was about 25 to 30 people meeting in a branch or group, and actually met in a office complex, was where the branch would meet. While I was there, the church purchased land to build the first chapel in Malawi, which is now there, and I believe they're about to have a stake there currently right now. But while I was there, it was only the one branch. It's now grown to, I believe, 4 branches, or about to be wards. When I was there, the first missionary left Malawi. His name was Noah Mkono. So it was great to see the experiences that I was able to have with him as a branch missionary, and see him be the first missionary to leave Malawi. He's very hungry, very excited to be the first missionary, very proud of that fact, to be the first missionary leaving Malawi. The church had just opened up in 2003, the Lilongwe area. So the church originally was in Blantyre, which was the bigger city, but the capital is actually Lilongwe, which is farther north. And the church had just opened up Lilongwe as I was leaving the mission. And that was opened up by a missionary named Jonathan Rader. And they put 2 missionaries up there. And then after that, the church had reduced the size of missions, so I believe they might have pulled them back out after a while. But so as far as Malawi goes, it's great. It's the 3rd poorest country in the world. So even Zimbabwe, you go there and you get a little bit of a culture shock as far as the economic status. Malawi's even more so. They almost say it's 4th world, because it's that there's so much poverty there. So there's very few paved roads, lots of dirt roads. The towns where the people live are more just kind of thrown together. There's not really structure. There's no rhyme or reason. The country of Malawi used to be called Nyasa land, which actually means ugly in the local tongue. And they kind of did that because it is so beautiful, kind of like the Iceland, Greenland thing. They said it was an ugly land so that people would want to go there because it is so beautiful and so fruitful. The Lake Malawi is one of the largest lakes in Africa, and that's what Malawi is a small, skinny country, and that's what it borders, is the lake most of the way around. The growth there's a lot of hard work. You have more success in Zimbabwe and Zambia even, because the church is so young. Getting someone bought into the idea of this is a new church in this country is very, very hard, because you're meeting in a small branch, and it's amazing what a few strong Melchizedek priesthood holders with families can do for an area. And so really the church is focusing on trying to find and establish those Melchizedek priesthood and families in the areas that they open up, because it's such a great base for the church to grow off of. So that's really what we were focused on, was trying to find strong families with Melchizedek holders, priesthood holders that can lead a branch and lead the people themselves, to help them become self-sufficient. There was 4 missionaries, 4 elders, and 2 sisters when I was there. I don't know how many are there now, but I'm sure it's grown quite a bit. But when I had left, there was about 40 people attending. So you do have success. A lot of effort was in reactivation. Yeah, so inside of the townships in Malawi, they have a different governmental system to where they have what they call a chief. And that chief is kind of someone that people go to for advice and to solve small qualms or issues within that small township. So one of the members there was the chief, so we all called him, chief, because of the title that he had. And he was someone that was partially active. He'd go a lot, but at the same time, he was pretty busy, and it was something that I tried to do, is create a special bond with him to see how we could also get into the local, tribal system and help with the families there that are more established, to help the base of the church get established. And I created a really unique bond with him, and I became very close to him. And it's pretty neat. The day that after I'd been there for 4.5 months of, laboring, and I'd set these personal goals for myself to attain, and this many people that I had to contact every single day, and try to break these records of contacts that you could do every day. And a lot of hard work, and wasn't as fruitful per se in baptisms, but it was definitely fruitful in the blessings that I saw in the experiences that I had. But one of those was with Chief. After all the hard work that I'd put in for those 4.5 months, he gathered up all the members, and he had a small farewell party for me, which is it's pretty neat to see how you can spend 4.5 months with someone, and they take you in as your own, and they want to love you and unconditionally. And the first thing you'll notice is in Africa is it's very black and white, unlike the United States, where we have a lot of gray here and a lot of a lot more things that you can justify. Whereas Africa, either someone is doing something very, very wrong, or they're trying their best to do what's right. And the same thing is the temptations are very black and white. So it's almost like refreshing to go there and to see either the wickedness or the righteousness. There's not a lot of gray. And with that, I think that happens because of all the trials that Africans have with the poor governments that they have, and the unrighteous dominion of the leaders that goes on in pretty much every African country. There's a lot of political turmoil, and because of that political turmoil, it's like you read in the scriptures where the people, they've been compelled to be humbled because of their circumstances, with their living circumstances and their lack of freedom and their lack of being able to have a successful life just by working hard, like most people experience elsewhere. So the people in Africa are so humble, and there's a special spirit that is just, you can't deny that the spirit that they bring, the light of Christ is so heavy on them, that it's humbling to anybody that is able to experience that, because of the lack of things that they have, that, you know, any first world country would say, you know, you have to have this and this to be happy in life. And once you realize that all that's taken away, your relationship with God becomes that much closer, because you really are watching people count on God for the next meal and count on God for their health. When you're in Africa, if you get sick, people are genuinely worried about you when you're sick. So if they find out that an elder is sick or you're sick, they really are worried about you, because there, if you get sick, you know, they don't know how long, you know, you could possibly pass away, which is very normal for them. So life and death, black and white, is very large. You know, AIDS is a huge issue in those areas, especially Zimbabwe and Malawi and Zambia and South Africa. AIDS is rampant. So, you know, funerals are just kind of part of their life. They have funerals at the chapel every week, you know, it seemed like. And someone's always passing away because of the rampant disease that's going on there. So because of all that humility, it makes your experiences, it's like their time is right now to hear the gospel. They've been compelled to be humble by their political circumstances and the lack of worldly items that they have in their lives, that when you go into a home, they will let anybody come talk to them. When you're going out as a missionary, when you're tracting, especially in the high density, lower income areas, they'll anybody let you into their house. So as you sit down with them, it's different, because you're not being rejected. You're asking and praying in your heart and asking the Spirit to guide you if this family is ready for them to hear the gospel, which is something that you don't get anywhere else. And it's probably, you know, unique to that region of the world. Malawi is a great place. It's green. There's a lot of hills. It's very humid. A lot more rain goes down there than per se in Zimbabwe. But the church is very young. Most people don't even know what the Book of Mormon is, whereas, you know, outside in Zimbabwe and Zambia, the pastors have done a pretty good job of telling people, you know, what the Book of Mormon is, or what it isn't, is a better way to say that. So Malawi is very just young, and the church is very new, and people haven't heard much about it. So that's Malawi. In Zimbabwe, you have two of the main tribes. There's a few smaller tribes, but they're not really part of the greater. I mean, they're probably make up 2% of the population, but the rest of the tribe, so the main tribe is called the Shona tribe, and they speak the language called Shona, and that is the dominant tribe in the country. I think it's about 75% of the country is of Shona descent, and that is what the current president of the Zimbabwe, President Mugabe, is a Shona man. Traditionally, from what I understood, the Shona were more of farming people, more of a smaller tribe as far as stature. And then down south you have the other tribe in the southern part of Zimbabwe, closer to South Africa. They're called the Ndebele tribe. And the Ndebele tribe speaks a different language than the Shona tribe. They speak with clicks. So it's very similar to the Zulu language that is spoken in South Africa. So the Ndebele has three main clicks. You have the Q, which is it's a popping of your tongue. And then you have an X, where you kind of suck your tongue as you're saying X. So it's like Xhosa. So Xhosa is a tribe in South Africa, which Nelson Mandela was a Xhosa. So there's the X sound, and then there's the C sound, which is... So those are the three clicks. So that's very strange to be a new missionary and to hear clicking going on. But that's in the southern area called Bulawayo, or Ndebele land is the kind of like a county is called Ndebele land, and the city down there, the larger city, is called Bulawayo, and that's the second biggest city, and it's a pretty good sized city as well. So the Ndebeles were seen as more of a warrior tribe, or kind of a a tribe of warriors, which were, from what I understood, a major part of the fight for Zimbabwe's independence because they were of a larger stature. And they had actually, the Ndebele tribe originated from when Shaka Zulu was down in South Africa in the 1800s, or maybe even sooner, 1700s. They actually had run away from Shaka Zulu. Shaka Zulu was kind of a crazy king down in South Africa, or in that area. He would force people to go run off a cliff. If they didn't do that, to show that their loyalty to him, he'd kill them anyway. So it's kind of like he was a little bit crazy. So this Ndebele portion of Shaka Zulu's kingdom had gotten tired of him, and they ran up and retreated to find freedom and a better life up in Zimbabwe in the southern end. So those are the two tribes in Zimbabwe: the Shona tribe and the Ndebele tribe. The Ndebele tribe is more in opposition to the current government, so you'll see a lot more of them being opposed to the current government that's in power. So whereas the Shona, they have both parties, but the Shona is the larger tribe. So those the two languages that you will hear will be Shona, and the other language is Ndebele. So in the capital city, it's mostly spoken. Shona is mostly spoken there. In the eastern part is called Mutare. It's a mountainous part. Shona is spoken there. And then in central Zimbabwe is a place called Gweru. And it's kind of a mixing pot, but it's mostly, I'd probably say like 60-40 for Ndebele versus Shona. I mean, there's more Shona spoken than Ndebele, whereas Bulawayo is predominantly Ndebele. So the name Zimbabwe actually comes from, these ruins in kind of the central part of Zimbabwe, and it's called the Great Zimbabwe. It's a former castle or fortress. As far as they haven't really been able to find exactly who built the castle or this fortress, but it was called the Great Zimbabwe, and that's where they took the name Zimbabwe from. Is from that castle that the ruins are there. So portions of that are still there, and you'll find that all over, kind of like there. It's kind of like our Mount Rushmore or our Washington D.C. You'll find on their money and all over the political parties. And inside that castle, the only thing they found was this figurine of this bird. So you'll see this kind of bird figurine on their money as well, because that was one of the things that was found inside of the Great Zimbabwe. But if you're lucky, you might be able to go visit the Great Zimbabwe. I, on the other hand, was not able to go visit it because it's kind of away from most of where the missionaries are. So, but the Great Zimbabwe is, from what I understand, a pretty immaculate place. It's a great place to go visit, so hopefully you'll be able to do that. On your mission, you're going to go through experiences, and you hear about all these experiences as a pre-missionary, and you want to have these great stories that you can bring home. And just remember that everybody's experiences are unique, and that you shouldn't expect to have the same experience as other people, and that everybody has a different type of spirit, and because our spirits are so different, our experiences will be vastly different. So don't have any preconceived notions of what you have to do or what type of experiences that you have to be a successful missionary, because we're all different and we all have different capabilities. And don't worry about your successes numbers, and don't worry about leadership positions, and don't worry about what you were able to accomplish numerically. Because the experiences that you have are going to be unique to yourself, and you create those through your faith and through your sacrifice. They don't just come to you. You don't just wake up and roll out of bed and you become the successful missionary. Remember that the blessings of success come to you when you've really, really tried and been tested. And then, just remember that just because somebody else has these grand experiences doesn't mean that that's the experience that you have to have. Because I remember before my mission, I used to think, I hear these missionary stories and I have to have these experiences that are either equally as great or quantifiably greater because I wanted to be better. But remember that the experiences have to be unique, and those experiences have to be sincere, and they can't be falsely created. And that only happens after you've been able to humble yourself and put your will into the will of the Lord. So just remember that. Don't Don't try to have somebody else's experiences or have somebody else's mission. Make your mission your own, and that you do that by following your Savior and following His will and what He wants to have done. And that's, the best advice I could give as far as don't worry about what other people's experiences are. Africans are dreamers. They always tell you about their dreams. They live very close to what I feel is the Spirit of Christ. And you'll walk into their house and they'll want to tell you about the dream that they had and how that correlates with your recent visit with them about the gospel. You start to realize that things don't happen by chance. You don't get called on a mission by chance. My mother was very worried about, as any mom would, to have their son go to Africa. So I'll never forget, my mom was doing education week at BYU, and she sees this little black lady walking around on campus. So my mom stops off the side of the road and says, "Do you need a ride somewhere?" Realizing that, hey, my son's about to go to Africa, but not realizing that this little lady was actually from Zimbabwe. And her name was Sister Dube, and she was one of the first members that had been baptized in Africa. She was actually baptized up in Europe and then went back to Zimbabwe. But she was here for a short time, and she actually was lost and needed some help. And my mom found out that she was from Zimbabwe, and they started talking. And she promised my mom that she would be my mother while I'm in Africa. So it's pretty neat to have that experience. And then my first area in the capital city of Harare, 3 houses down, was Sister Duve's home. And it was just reassuring for me and for my mom to know that God's looking out and things don't happen by chance. And the more that you place faith in those small moments and the small pearls of feeling the Spirit and those small bits of wisdom and those experiences that you'll never forget. I'll never forget, quickly I learned how spiritual these people were and how they all did want to talk about God, and they're very, very religious people. They love to sing, they love to read the scriptures, they love to talk about God. Rarely do you ever meet someone that doesn't want to talk about God. I remember one time in one of the low-density areas in the first area that I was in, it'd been like a pretty rough time. My companion had been sick and been a little bit downtrodden, and here I was, this new missionary, and trying to figure out, what am I doing and how do I help us have success in our area. So, I've been focused a lot on prayer and learning about that. So after, hours of not getting anywhere with anybody, I decided, let's say a prayer on this corner of this street. So we kind of tucked away and said a quick prayer to have God guide us to anybody that was looking to be taught. So we get done with the prayer, and sure enough, we go and knock on a door, and not only did we get rejected, but they opened up the door for their dogs to chase us down the street. And you start to put your head back down, and all of a sudden this young boy comes by, and he's on his bike, and he says, "Hey, elders." And I said, "Oh, hi." He says, "I've actually, are you guys elders, right?" And I said, "Yeah, we're elders for the Church of Jesus Christ." He says, "Can you come to my house?" We were taught by an elder 3 years ago when we moved, and we've never been able to find the elders since. And I was riding my bike, and I just been riding around, and I decided to look down the street, and I saw you guys standing there on the corner, and I said that I really appreciate it if you could come teach me and my mom. And that was the Rice family. So from that point forward, my faith and that experience that I was able to have early enough on my mission guided me as a pivotal moment for me to have that in the first few months of my mission, to know that God really is there. And that people really do want to hear your message. And that experiences don't come easy, and that the trial of your faith is the greatest blessing that you'll ever experience. Because through the trial of your faith, you'll see miracles happen. You're lucky to go to Zimbabwe. You're lucky to go to Malawi. You're lucky to be in Africa. I'm starting to learn that the more humble a person is, the more of God's love that they have inside of them, and the greater of a spirit that they are. You start to realize, well, these people might not have much when it comes to life, but they are very blessed. Blessed more than you and I probably can be in life, because they live by faith every single day. They know that God is there. It's not a question. Whereas when we seem to quantify and gain more assets and physical possessions in life, we seem to start to wonder if God is there. But when you're living every single day where your next meal will come, and being completely humble because of the circumstances, their faith is so strong it's humbling to you. So the most important thing for you to do is strip yourself of pride, strip yourself of everything that you think you know, and all prejudgment, and follow the Spirit. And the Spirit does amazing things, because it's not you converting anybody, it's the Spirit. And you're there as a vessel to carry that. And that's the greatest experience that you can have, is to make yourself spiritually worthy to be guided and do the Lord's work as He wants, in a place in the world that's a Christian hotbed, where the people are wanting God in their life. They're not denying God. They're wanting a closer relationship with God. And that is something that I count myself blessed. And the experiences that you have are experiences that you make based off of your faith. And to be able to say that if you do this, you get this blessing and this experience, it makes me feel pretty darn lucky.
What was one of the most exotic or crazy foods you had on mission?
So there's actually quite different foods in Zimbabwe. You have what's called makimbi, which is it's a caterpillar. It's about this large, about this wide. They dry out the caterpillar, and then they will cook it in, after they dry it out, they cook it in grease and then serve it to you. I've also was fed termites. So I actually take termites and fry those up. I never tried this, but they call grasshoppers, they call them larvae, but it's a grasshopper. You'll find little kids will go into the fields and catch those and rip the wings off and eat them. So you'll see that happen a lot. So they do eat bugs in Africa, and I did eat bugs in Africa. The main food that you'll eat there is called sudza, or estuala down in Bulawayo, and in South Africa it's called pop. But basically it's our field corn that we feed our cows, so maize. So it's kind of the rougher corn, not a sweet corn. They grind it up, is what they make like corn tortillas. So instead of making corn tortillas, they make it into more like a mashed potato substance. And then that is like they give you a big plop of that on your plate with some side of greens. And if they really, are well-to-do, they'll give you chicken, or they'll give you some kind of beef with some kind of soup mixed in with it, with the chicken and the beef, and also with the collard greens, because basically it's like a collard green type of vegetable. But they use tomatoes a lot, and yeah, but that kapenta was pretty tough, or the makimbi was pretty tough. And the last thing is kapenta, is this dried, it's almost like the size of a goldfish. They dry it out and then fry it up, and you can smell that from a few houses away. So if they're having kapenta that night, you'll smell it a few houses away, and you also will probably burp it up for a few days after.
Awesome. What was one of the most crazy or dangerous experiences you had?
Well, it's funny, anytime you get pulled over, as you're driving different places, they'll have roadblocks, and a lot of times the first thing they'll do if you're driving is roll down their window, and they'll put an AK-47 up to your head to show their dominance to you. So that was always a little bit made you nervous about the circumstances, but you start to get used to it. But the crazy situation was during an election in the country. The political party ZANU-PF was out with the police force, and they were going around and intimidating people. And I was with a branch missionary on exchanges, and we've been teaching all day, and it just gotten dark. And we come around the corner, and sure enough, they're kind of felt like a mob. And they circled around me really quickly, and the branch missionary had run off because he was scared. And so here I am, all by myself, surrounded by this almost political gang with the cops that were, in connection with them, and with their, big sticks ready to beat me, and they had their guns, and they started asking me, "Hey, white man, what are you doing here?" So sure enough, I just started handing out family proclamations and telling them I'm here for Jesus, and was able to get out of it. But that was the sole time that I was a little bit nervous.
What was one of the most spiritual experiences you had, or a time you felt the Spirit strongly?
Wow, every day. But probably I had very, very special experiences. The one that I can probably share that, I feel more comfortable sharing is probably the feeling that I had when I was getting on the plane to fly home. And the plane taking off the ground, and, you're looking down at this place that you've been for 2 years, and you start to feel the sheer joy of the experience that you have of when you've known that you gave everything that you possibly could as a missionary, even though you're not perfect. But that experience of bittersweet of leaving these people that you love, but going home and knowing that the Lord was happy with you, or with me in the service that I had given, and that was something that I'll never forget, and something that I cherish in my heart, was the joy that I felt as the plane lifted off the ground, but also the pains of having to say goodbye to some people I love.
What was one of the greatest life lessons you learned on your mission?
The greatest life lesson I learned was to, just don't become idealistic. Just because something doesn't go as you planned out in your mind, there's always different alternative options, even though it's not the option that you wanted per se, but to be optimistic when things are not looking well, and learning how to be positive in bad experiences was the greatest lesson I could ever learn, because life's not always going to be fun, and it's not always easy. And to learn that through trials and hard times, you can still be happy, and it's a decision that you make. And it's not a circumstance that happens to you, but to know that your free agency and you deciding to be happy and you deciding to feel joy is a choice, was the greatest lesson that I've been able to carry forward from what I learned in Africa, was knowing that there's people that have less, and they're happier with less than those of us that have more, and that they see happiness and joy in a place that a lot of it's been taken from them.
What was one of the best skills or abilities you gained or developed as a missionary?
The best skill I was able to gain was learning how to love complete strangers, and to try to see people as the Savior had seen them or sees them. Having someone yell at you because of your skin color was a little bit unearthing, but then as you start to learn that you can love anyone, and you can love them even if they hate you, was a skill that I've been able to try to keep in my life, because it doesn't cloud your mind, and it doesn't cause any pain necessarily to you. But to be able to love everybody that you come in contact with is the greatest blessing that I've ever been able to witness and try to emulate in my own life.
Any funny language mistake that you or another missionary made? Or
Yeah, up in Malawi, they speak a lot of different languages, but the main one that they spoke in Blantyre is called Chichewa, I believe, if I remember correctly. And in Malawi, in that area, they mix their L's and their R's a lot. So instead of saying, let's say a prayer, they say, instead of saying let's pray, they say let's play, because they mix their R's and their L's. They interchange them. And I don't know why they do that. And I don't know if it's because of their language, but when they're speaking English, they interchange these letters a lot. So we've been teaching this gentleman, and when asking him for so long to pray about the Book of Mormon. So we get there, and we've been working on them for multiple weeks and just begging him to please just read this book and pray about it. So we ask him, first thing, he's playing this game of chess, and I'm not really thinking about it because I'm so focused on being a missionary. So he's playing this game of chess with his friend, and we're like, well, what you been up to? And he's like, I've just been praying. And I'm like, oh, you have? He's like, yeah. I'm like, well, how's that been going? Tell me more about that. It's been great. I've prayed a lot, and I've been winning a lot of the games. And then finally it hit me. He wasn't talking about praying about the Book of Mormon. He was talking about playing the game of chess with his friends. And because he interchanges his L's and his R's, when he says prayer, he really means he's playing. So that was always fun to have them interchange their R's and L's.
Most extreme weather you experienced?
In Zimbabwe, their seasons are opposite of ours, so it doesn't really ever get too cold, but in Zimbabwe, when it's 50, 60 degrees, it feels a lot colder than in the U.S. because they don't have insulation and things like that. So it doesn't get too cold, so won't really ever need anything like a jacket. But when it rains there during the rainy season is November, December, and January. When it rains, it definitely rains very, very hard. So it doesn't matter if you have an umbrella and a jacket. When it comes down, it's going to come down on you. So, but other than that, it's really hot in the summer. There's October, they call it Suicide Month, is what a lot of the Rhodesian whites would call it because it is so hot there. It's all in Celsius, so I don't remember, but I remember it was very, very warm.
What was one of the hardest things that you went through or experienced?
My time in Malawi I had great expectations for myself of going up there, and I had great goals set for myself to go up there, because every time I went to a new area, I tried to set new goals for myself of what I wanted to achieve numerically. Not that would be my end goal, but my time in Malawi was hard because that was a time that I learned a lot of humility, that despite everything that I thought was right, didn't always lead to what I thought was success. And then let alone on that, you'll have companions on your mission that sometimes, you just don't mesh too well with. So, I felt very alone in in Malawi. I felt very worn out at times and spiritually drained from having such a small area of people that were actually members and not a lot of support. And your mission president would come by every 2 months, and that's the only time that you really hear from anybody from the mission. So as a time that I felt a lot alone, but it was also a great time that I count, because that's the time that I really learned how to rely on the Savior and stop trying to rely on my skills and my abilities, but to rely on the Lord and what the Lord wants. And it really taught me that it's the Lord's work. And it wasn't my work, and it wasn't my mission. It was my mission doing the Lord's work. And so it was really a change of heart for me to go from seeing things as I saw to seeing things as God wanted to see, and that it was God's timing. And that success wasn't measured numerically or in baptism, but the success was measured in the ultimate grand scheme of things.
What's the best piece of mission prep advice you could give to someone just heading out to the mission field?
Best advice I can give is not worry about the things that you take with you as far as possessions that you think are great. But most importantly, the ultimate advice I can give you is humility and love are the greatest attributes that you can try to gain before your mission. With myself, the times I had the hardest times, when the times where I was prideful, or the time that I wasn't loving someone, was when I seemed to struggle the most. And with missionaries around me, remember to leave home at home and go be a missionary. Your job is not to be yourself and to have your own interests and your own hobbies and to worry about your entertainment, but to be fully entrenched in going about the Lord's business and to find joy in the gospel, because you'll quickly learn that the short-term happiness that you experience at home with your interests and your hobbies and all the different things that you fill your life with before your mission ultimately our short-term happiness, and that's all it is. And that true joy is experienced when you learn how to sacrifice, and you learn how to place things on the altar of sacrifice to get a greater good or a greater happiness and greater experiences and have renewed faith. So remember to be humble and to learn humility and to not think of yourself as something of great knowledge or someone of great experience, but to learn from everybody. As soon as you can learn to learn from everybody around you, you become a great teacher like our Savior.
What's the best advice you could give to a return missionary who's just getting home?
Pray about your spouse. Pray to find your spouse. And that timing is different for everyone. Don't rush into it, per se, but also don't prolong, and don't miss out on an opportunity that you could to find your spouse. Finding your husband or wife is going to be the next greatest conquest of your post-mission experience. On top of that, personally, you need to remember all the things that it took you to gain the Spirit every day are the same things that you have to do at home. And that adjusting is very, very hard. But you're not alone. And you'll find that the same key things that you did as a missionary to have success do transfer over in life. Well, it might be different, but they're still a part of you. If you still read your scriptures every day, and if you have sincere prayers and communication with your Savior and your Lord, that you'll be able to experience and go through anything that you learned as a missionary, and you'll be able to do the same while you get home. And the other thing is, don't forget what you experienced on your mission, and hold those things close to your heart. You don't have to tell everybody every story that you did. You know, they say you don't want to throw your pearls before swines. And it's the same thing in your mission stories. Not that, even members aren't, it's not awful to share all your stories, but a lot of times those short stories that are very spiritual and very personal, you don't have to share them with everybody. And hold those secret and sacred to yourself, because those moments that God gives you, those personal moments, are ones that you should probably keep to yourself. And there are great experiences that you have that you share, and those are the ones that God wants you to share. But you will have those moments that you need to keep personal, and you'll have the moments that you want to share with everybody. So really work on that. But so find your spouse, make sure it's the right decision in your life to marry that person, and then stick to the basics. Have faith in God, have charity, and have hope in life, just like you did as a missionary. Your circumstances might change and your routine might change, but if you keep the basics and you keep the Spirit in your life, then you'll be able to stay strong. Because when you come home, you think, because I went on a mission, I could never lose my testimony. But just like the testimony is described as a seed of faith in Alma, you have to remember that you have to nourish your testimony, and a mission is not enough to keep your testimony nourished for the rest of your life. And you'll start to learn that life is just as hard after your mission as it was on your mission or before your mission. And that life will always be a struggle, because going through struggles is what brings true happiness, by getting growth and expounding your knowledge and expounding your experience. And that's why you find when Joseph Smith says in Doctrine and Covenants at the end, he says, deep water is what I want to swim in. You start to realize that you start to want to have trials so that you can go through experiences, and so that you can come closer to your Savior, and you can come close to people around you and people that you love. And it's kind of crazy, because I remember before the mission, I didn't want trials. I wanted to stay away from having hard times, and I tried to prevent that, and I tried to control that. And as soon as you let go and trust and keep that faith after your mission, and remember that trials are a great blessing, and that you'll go through them after your mission, and that God is not a God of punishment, but that He loves us. And just because you're having a trial doesn't mean you need to lose your faith. Congratulations. Getting called to Zimbabwe is one of the greatest blessings of your life. believe that it didn't happen by chance. A lot of people have put in a lot of time and a lot of effort in their lives for the gospel to reach Zimbabwe. So believe that your call came from God, and you build upon that. When you realize that you were called by a prophet of God, you start to realize that the time that you're about to spend as a missionary in Zimbabwe is not going to change your life. It's going to change the lives, thousands and thousands of people's lives. The work that you do as a missionary in Zimbabwe has a pioneer spirit. You're helping these people build their land so they can receive a temple, so that they can receive the blessings that you've received as a member of this church, so that their country can receive the blessings that this country has received by having the gospel in this land. People that are called to Zimbabwe have a unique spirit. And I hate to say that, you're better than someone else by getting called to Zimbabwe, but do feel that you are elite. To be called to a country that has financial struggles, that has physical struggles, you'll see suffering, you'll see children that are hungry, you'll see death. And as you experience these things in life that are so extreme, you'll truly realize who the Lord is and how the Lord operates in their lives. I am grateful for the gospel. I'm grateful for what it taught me as a young man, and the experiences that I was able to remember and to store up before my mission helped me become a better missionary. Remember that your soul was pre-existent with our Father in the pre-existence, and that the saints of Zimbabwe were in the same pre-existence that you were, and they made the same promise to follow their Savior, and that you're going out there to find them. You're finding the most humble people on the earth to establish His kingdom and to teach them and to love them as He would love them. Is the greatest experience that you'll ever have. Enjoy the time that you have with your family so that you can carry their strength. Remember to involve your family in your mission. Even though you're on the other side of the world, your family can be a strength to your mission. They can pray for you. You share experiences with them. You share struggles with them. And by doing that, you share the spirit of Zimbabwe with them, which will make them blessed to see the things that you see and to have the things that you have experienced in their own lives. The gospel is the only thing that can solve the problems of Africa. And you have the unique call from God to be a missionary, to be part of His army, to change that. Sharing the gospel will bless your life. Your family's life. The experiences that you share and have while you're on your mission and the things that you get to go through will bless the lives of your children. The best advice I've ever given before my mission was to not have a day that you ever regret being a missionary. And trying to live my life like that for 2 years was the best thing that I ever did. To know that every day was dedicated to the service of our Lord and His church is something that I think about every single day. You'll remember these people. They'll reach out to you for the rest of your life, and they'll love you like they love their own family. So pray for the guidance of the Spirit, and pray for faith so that you can do things that God prophesied to us through our prophets would happen. Don't ever feel like there's nothing within your realm of capabilities. Remember, the gifts and the talents that you have are unique to yourself. And the gifts and talents that you have will touch the lives of thousands of people. And never give up on any single person. And always remember to see people as the Savior sees you. If you do that, you'll love your time in Zimbabwe, and you'll have the greatest experiences and the greatest mission on this earth with the most humble people that God has put on this earth. I love you as a new missionary going to the mission. Continue the strong pioneering spirit that was dedicated, and so many people have worked so many hours to try to help these people. Remember the grand picture that you're a part of, so that one day you'll be able to look back and say, I was a part of what went on in Zimbabwe. I was a part of those people, and I was able to learn and be blessed by them. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
So I got to Zimbabwe, me and 5 other missionaries, 2 of them sister missionaries, and we landed, and President Dube was the mission president, and he's waiting off at the end of the terminal with the APs, and he comes in and he gives us a big hug. And President Dube is a very powerful man, but he's a little short, so it just, he's actually really strong, and so when he hugs you, you can feel that this is a strong guy. And you can feel that this is a really spiritual guy too. He just has this thing. I don't know what it is, but it was cool getting there. And then instantly these 5 people that I had been assigned with, that I had 2 good close weeks with them in the MTC. They all got assigned somewhere, and then I had to wait a couple of days to go fly to Malawi, because that's where I was being assigned to. President Dube had pulled each of us in, and he told us where we're going and who we're going to be companions with. He tried to get me to learn how to pronounce my first companion's name. It was Elder Ngube, and I sat there, and my tongue was not ready for that yet, so it took me a little while. But my first day I was in a companionship threesome with the zone leaders, because I was waiting for them to take me to the airport the next day. And so instantly, like first thing, they took me to a lesson, and they sat me down, and it was just me, Elder Smoot, me and Elder Munyai, and these like a group of people that had just, it amazed me, because all these people saw the missionaries, and they're like, okay, everybody stop working, come on, we're gonna come here and listen. So I'm sitting there, and all this attention is on us. They're sitting there and looking at us, and they've got their pamphlets or their scriptures, and they're looking at us with like really happy faces. And I'm going, wow, this is unique, because I went and worked with the missionaries in North Carolina, but it was never like that. Like we'd knock on the door and they'd let us in, but no one was ever like super excited, at least that I saw, to see us. And so. And they just went in the line teaching. He would go, and then he'd look at me like I was supposed to teach the next principle. And I'm going, oh man, I've only had 2 weeks to learn these things. Let's see. God's our loving Heavenly Father. Then the gospel blesses families. Gospel blesses families. Going, so you guys have families? And it just most awkward first lesson ever. It was awful. And so, that's the thing about the missionaries, at least in Zimbabwe, is that they'll throw you right in the mix, and they're not afraid to let you screw up, and that's a good thing too, because I screwed up a lot. But at the end, the people that were there could tell I was so nervous that when we finished, they looked at me and they're like, Elder, oh yeah, they couldn't say that name, Elder Ski, I was like, yeah, Skrosky, Ski, got many nicknames over the years. But they're like, here, we want you to have something. And they ran this souvenir shop. And so they picked up this massive stone sculpture. And they were like, we want you to have this as a gift. I'm like, no, I can't accept that. No. And they're like, no, take it. We want you to have it. And normally, they sell this thing for like 30 or 40 bucks at least. And they just want me to take it. And I'm going, no, I can't do that. And so I look down and there's this row of smaller things. And there's this little stone turtle. And I went, here, can I have this instead? And they look and they go, yeah, you can have that instead. We want you to take this big thing, but yes, you can have that. So, I was like, okay, thank you. And I was flattered. And for the rest of my mission, I had that little stone turtle on my desk. And I just went, what an interesting first lesson. Man, oh man. And on the way back, the zone leaders, of course, were going, man, you should have taken it. That would have been awesome. You never could have gotten it home, but it would have been awesome. But yeah, so first week is really strange. It caught me completely off guard. Especially then, they sent me to Malawi, and everything that I had learned in 2 days in Zimbabwe completely thrown out the window when I went to Malawi. I think the strangest thing that I had to get used to was being able to talk to people right off the street, and they would stop and they would look at me and they would smile and they would want to know what I had to say. Not used to that. I'm more used to working with the missionaries doing that in North Carolina. We would stop people on the street if we could. Most of the time they would just keep walking, or they would sometimes they would just say no thank you, but frequently, you get insults or you get really angry looks. But these people in Malawi and Zimbabwe, you can say, excuse me, sir, I want to talk to you about the gospel. And they say, please tell me more. And then you talk to them and they'd say, oh yeah, my family's this, and we love talking about the gospel, and we love talking about Jesus. And you'd say, well, can we come and teach your family? Yeah, sure. When would you like? It was genuinely sometimes that easy, because they're such loving people. I mean, you'll have jerks and mean people like every other place in the world, but most people are just so glad to see you, and to see they respect anybody who's willing to take time out of their lives to serve God. And that it was strange. It was very strange. So living in Zimbabwe, I'm sure like most missions, you have your the like fantasy apartment where everyone's like, oh man, that apartment is nice. And then you also have the places where they say, hi man, you're living in outer darkness there. We know you suffered when you lived in that apartment. But those are usually the better ones. So a lot of the time, the mission president wanted us to live right with the people, of course. That's the best way to do it, at least in that situation. And so one of the places I lived for about 7 months was in what used to be the servants' quarters of a much bigger house. So we lived in the little side apartments. Wow, word. Kind of like a shack on the outskirts. So it had like a small bathroom, and it had a kitchen and a bedroom, and that's all you need. And so the flooring there, carpets are not that popular just because vacuums aren't that big of a thing there. Electricity and water will come and go very frequently, and so you can't really rely on that. So most of the time people just sweep, and so carpets aren't really that common of a thing. So what they'll do is they'll apply this stuff called Cobra, which is like kind of a floor wax that if you sit on it too soon after applying it, you will get nice red streaks on your pants that I laughed at my companion several times when he was new, because he didn't know better. But so the apartments are just like missionary apartments. You'll find great ones, you'll find rough ones. Because water and electricity come and go, most of us would store bottles of water all around the house, so that if water goes for a few days, then we'd still be able to drink. We'd probably do really poor excuses of bucket baths. although bucket baths can be the best. If you have water but you don't have electricity, you take the cold water and you put it you boil some of it on the gas stoves that we had, and then you pour it in with some cold water, so you make it nice and a good temperature for you, and then you just go into the shower. You get a cup and you just splash it on yourself, rinse it out. It's actually not nearly as bad as I was thinking it was going to be. I thought about that going, man, I've been spoiled with my showers at home, like my nice big water heater, and so bucket baths are pretty fun. You'll have some missionaries that love them, some that hate them. And then transportation, like into your area or into town, they have these things called convoys. And it's basically like, I think of the equivalent of a VW bus, like you'll have the hippies used to have here in like the 60s and whatnot, or my dad used to have. And you fit 25 to maybe 28 people, you cram them into one of those vans. And there it's interesting because you've got like 4 to a row that's maybe like that wide. And so if you're getting in there and then you see this large person come in, you go, uh-oh, it's gonna get tight in here real quick. So you if you're claustrophobic, it takes a little while to get used to, and if otherwise, it's a ton of fun. And the combi drivers will just drive around and they'll be yelling what their destination is. So they'll be like, "Towny town, town." And so you'll wave them in, and they'll come and they'll pick you up, and you give them the money for how far I guess you're going to go, and then you'll jump in there. And a lot of the time they'll see the missionaries and they're like, "Oh, you're going to town," and then they'll fight with other combis. They'll both drive and try to pick you up. It's really competitive, and then you'll go in there, and there's just this hub of hundreds of these bands, just all yelling, saying, "This is going to Mtumbani and Soxile, Bulawayo." So it was really cool. And some of the zone leaders would have cars, but the rest of us would always pay those guys, and we'd get brought around with the combis. So those were cool. Hard part about that is when you go shopping, and then you have to take all your food, and you basically you can't buy too much at a time because you have to transport that back on the combi where there's already no room, and take that all the way back to your apartment. And so it was pretty interesting. Then they use American dollars there now, with inflation and everything that went. Zimbabwe had a hard time with currency for a while. So now they use American dollars and South African rand. And they'll use pula from Botswana or anything that they know what the exchange rate is, and you can use that for money. But because bills are a lot easier to transport than coins, because those are really heavy, you don't really get change very often unless it's in South African rand. So a lot of the time you'll buy something and then you'll get lollipops or candy in change. So you always have a few lollipops in your backpack. So when kids come by, they know, now those missionaries, they always have lollipops. At least you know how much things are worth because you're using American dollars. So you should know the basic, how much things should be. You have to be careful because a lot of people will see missionaries and they'll see us in nice white shirts, and it doesn't matter if you're American or not. They'll see missionaries and they'll think, oh, these guys have money. So if you're ever buying something on the market, you have to barter down, because you have to realize they're working in a marketplace. They know they're gonna try and get what they can. I bought something one time and my companion looked at me and he just goes, "You paid about 4 times what you should have paid for that." Bummer. So, that's how it goes. There's 100 things that I love about Zimbabwe and the people, so I guess I have to pick my favorites. Something I was kind of speaking on before is just about the attitude that they have towards missionaries. Is Zimbabwean people are naturally just very friendly. I don't know what it is that makes them so, but they are polite, and they're willing to take time out of their day to speak with you. I mean, there's always exceptions. There's always rude people, and there's always, people wherever you go in this world that will, not be polite. But as a whole, like, the country is friendly, and they smile more than I was used to. It was fantastic to see. As a missionary there, you kind of get spoiled because people are so nice to you. You can talk with them about anything, and you'll say, "Oh, hi, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints," and they'll be like, "Oh, I know about your church. You guys believe this." We're like, "Yeah, and I'd like to talk to you more about it." And they say, "Sure, teach me." And you invite someone to church, and while it's not true most of the time, they say, "Yes, I will be there." And it's interesting to have people tell you anything other than "No, I don't think so," because they're just so friendly. If you ever go into a house, it's just culture that they offer you something to eat. And even if, like, I had certain situations where someone genuinely didn't like us as missionaries, but maybe their spouse or someone in their family was having lessons, when we would go in there, they would still be polite and offer us food. Even though they didn't approve of what we were doing, they still were kind. It was very heartwarming to see that. A lot of the, like, when you talk about the women in Zimbabwe, you call them mamas, if they are moms, so like this mama here, which writing home is always funny to say, because my mother goes, "What are you talking about? I'm your mother." Like, well, sorry, Mom, this mama, they do adopt you, basically. They treat you like their sons, and they'll call you their sons. They'll say, "My son, come here," and for me, I loved that. It made me feel so welcome and loved. I felt like I belonged, when people would say things like that. And they would discipline me like a mother would as well. When I do something wrong, they tell me. They're very straightforward with that, which is so entertaining when it's not me. When it would be my companion getting scolded, I'd sit there and be like, "Oh, you should have known better, elder. Now your mom is going to be angry with you." But like holidays in Zimbabwe, people, I think it's just a worldwide thing. We love food as people. So they'll cook special meals, or I think singing cultural songs is fantastic. I guess the biggest example of that was when you'd go to a funeral. There would be, like, it's tradition, I guess, for everybody to come, and the family provides food for everybody. I guess it would be normally like in the village, but here it would be like anybody in the neighborhood would come in, and we'd be fed, and we'd sing songs, and they would talk about the life of the person, and while it was mournful, it was also an occasion to be together, and it was a very unified feeling. So I guess overall, I would say Zimbabweans are very good at remembering that we all come from smaller groups, whether it be a tribe or a village or anything like that. It's unified, that we are a family. In church, it's a lot of fun when they translate the hymns into Shona or Ndebele. And they also have their own very unique way of singing those hymns, where they'll add some flourish, like when we meet, "God be with you till we meet again," till we meet, and one of the things that I swear every single branch does, "Till we meet at Jesus' feet, till we meet." Every single person sings it that way. It is the most entertaining. I love it. So when I first went there, the Zimbabwe Harare Mission was Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi. And I was there, and then 6 months after I arrived, they split the mission. So all the missionaries in Zimbabwe stayed there, and all the missionaries in Zambia and Malawi became the Zambia Lusaka Mission. When I first got there, there was maybe 100 and maybe a little bit more than that of missionaries. When they split, it went down a lot. But over the next few months, it got back up to 100. I think they were aiming for 150 with the addition of so many missionaries in the field. In the past, it used to be just part of the Africa Southeast mission. President Dube, my mission president, he served in that mission. He actually served in some of the same places that I did, and back then the mission was gigantic and very few missionaries. There are several people there that had a huge impact on whether or not the church could be successful there. The Nields are a really kind of well-known family with the members and even with the government, because he used to be a rugby star, and so he would help them when the church was getting started. He was a good influence with the government to help make sure that everything was okay, with that everybody was all right with the church's growth, and that nobody was rubbing shoulders too tightly with causing problems. Started out as little districts, little branches, not very many members at all, and then at some point it started to grow, and the missionaries started to come in. And when I was there was a stake in Bulawayo. I think the stake was created in Gweru while I was there. When I was in Bindura, it became a district. And they organized district presidencies in there, and there was a district in Mutare. There was 2 stakes in Harare. I know now that they've split at least once, both in Bulawayo and Harare. So there's 2 more stakes since I was there, at least. And it's one of the fastest growing missions in the world. There were, it seemed like every state conference that you went to, they were announcing splitting off another branch or another ward, or it was growing like crazy. President Dube used to be a stake president there, and then he's now a member of the 70, and so was President Makasi. He was in Bulawayo. He was in charge of the CES program, and then he was the stake president, and now I think he's in Area 70 as well. And so we had an elder cook came, and I remember him telling us that from what he's seen, some of the men that are in Zimbabwe, some of the priesthood leaders are really, I guess he was just impressed with how dedicated they were to helping the growth of the church there. And that's true. I mean, missionaries there, you can ask the branch president and they'll go interact with you. People are very willing to help you with the church. I think there were, I'd give you numbers, but it's been a while, so I'm not sure I remember exactly how many stakes or members. The classic Zimbabwean dish, I would assume most people would agree, is sadza and chicken relish and vegetables. So sadza is basically the staple diet, because they grow lots of corn there. They call it maize, not that big of a stretch. But then they have grinding mills where you take your dried maize, grind it into flour, and so then you have lots of what's called milli meal. And you take that, you boil it, you stir it up, and it becomes basically a big paste. And some people like it really hard, some people like it really soft. But regardless, when you eat it, you are putting your fingers into burning hot lava, and so you got to be careful when you're first starting. Every green missionary burns his fingers, I think, at least a little bit, because they do not know. So basically, you take that, and it's basically I'm saying basically a lot. They're taking something the consistency of Play-Doh, and you take it and you can make it into either a ball or into a little scoop. And then you scoop up some gravy, which has pieces of meat or vegetables, and you take that and you eat that, and it's absolutely delicious. The first time you have it, it's the strangest experience, but eventually you grow to love it. And then they have some sort of meat, and almost always chicken, and they know how to fry chicken there. It's not Kentucky chicken, it's not Southern fried chicken, but it is a really tasty way that they do it. And then there's a thing called kovu, which is a vegetable that grows in a stalk out of the ground. You'll see it being grown in every single person's garden. And as the leaves come off, they just pluck the leaves, and then it continues to grow up and up. So it starts off, on the ground, and eventually it'll be this tall, and it'll just have a bare stalk with like 5 or 6 leaves at the top that they'll pick. And they chop it and fry that. So you use the sadza to basically dip it and pick up vegetables or relish in the meat and eat that. And when I say relish, I don't mean what they put on hot dogs here. I mean relish is basically any meat or gravy that they have with the food. So that's your basic meal. Sometimes people will like kapenta, and kapenta is these little tiny dried fish that I never really enjoyed. I ate it, and I always was very grateful when someone offered it to me. And I don't know, but I guess you compare that to the chicken, and I definitely had my preference. I think the hardest part about kapenta was knowing that they had eyes that are looking at me, but it was great. And let's see, what else was a big favorite. I was offered rabbit many times, and guinea pig once or twice. The most extreme ones, I'm sure that all the missionaries we love talking about, and the members, they would love feeding it to us, because they're saying, "Oh no, you have to have this. You're eating in Zimbabwe. You have to have a traditional Zimbabwean meal." So one was maklimbi, or madora, which is the caterpillars. And so these caterpillars grow by the thousands on some of these trees, and they call them mupani worms as well. And they'll fry those up, and you'll eat those just like you would with the chicken. And I remember the first time I had those, I pick one up out of the bowl, and I'm looking at it, and I'm just going, "You are ugly." And I'm going to eat you, but so you pop it in, and once you try and forget what it is that's in your mouth, it's delicious. It's just the face is what got me. And there's something called ishwa, which is these flying termites that during a certain time of the year, kids will stand around these little termite holes, and they'll cover them, because termites will come out at night. And so if you cover it, they think it's nighttime, because the daylight's no longer shining down. And so then they'll start crawling out by the hundreds, and the flying ones are the ones you want to eat. The ones that are on the ground have angry little pincers that they hurt. And I didn't know that. And I was trying to pick them up, and the kids were like, "No, no, 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 Marungu, no." And, I got pricked pretty good. Those things do not let go. And so they'll grab the termites out of the air. Sometimes they'll pull off the wings, and they'll stick them in a bag, and they'll fry those up and eat those. Or you can just eat it right out of the air if you want, which I did, because the kids are like, "Do it." So I was like, okay. So that was good. Zimbabweans like to eat parts of the chicken that we're not used to, like chicken feet and chicken neck. And while it does take some getting used to, it is very edible, and it's very tasty. Once you've gotten over your preconceived notions of saying feet, but they're pretty good. So yeah, the food is pretty tasty. Rice is another big one. Rice and beans, basically anything that comes big bulk bags, and can be. They come up with really creative ways to eat it as well. You'll get, like, as missionaries, I guess when you go home, unless if you don't trust yourself cooking sadza, which is understandable, because if you cook it wrong, you're just gonna make yourself sick, just because if you don't boil it the right way, and if you don't get all the lumps out, it's just not good. So you'll go home, and most missionaries cook rice or packets of macaroni or spaghetti, and there's lots of soup packets that you can put the flavoring on there, and fry some meat. And I mean, that's your basic Zimbabwean meal. The biscuits there, the cookies they call biscuits, are you can buy really nice ones, and then you can buy the really bulk bags that are basically like just flavor on flour, and I actually bought those all the time because it was something I would just sit there and study with. But it's the food that, man, now I'm really hungry. I miss that food really badly. So one of the drinks there is called mazoe, and it's fantastic because it's basically just syrup that you're supposed to dilute, which I did not know. And so my companion's like, hey, pour yourself a glass of mazoe and pour me some as well. I went, sure. And I went to the kitchen, and I'm brand new. Pour us both a glass and go back in, and he grabs it and he looks at it and he knows what I just did. And he just looks at me and he watches me as I take it, and I take a sip, and 5 times the amount of concentration that I should be getting of sugar, and my brain just exploded, and I spit it out. I'm like, whew. You know, I swear I could smell colors at that point. And, and he laughs and he's like, you're supposed to dilute it. Yeah, now you tell me. But occasionally you'll start craving that stuff once again. So it's good. I miss the Zimbabwean food a lot. Like, getting food is pretty cool because lots of people are entrepreneurs, and so they'll have little stands outside their houses or, you know, on the street somewhere. So if you ever need fresh tomatoes or fresh vegetables, they're right there. Like, a lot of the time we'll just poke our head out the window to a little kid that knows us, and we're like, hey, and we'll give them $1, like, go get us some tomatoes, and they'll run and they'll grab you some tomatoes and they'll bring them back, because kids are used to their moms having them do that all the time. So it's really fun. You feel really important. Like, hey kid, little one, and they're like, yes, and they run and they get you something, and then if you're nice, you'll give them a sweet or something like that. The Shona is the accent for Shona is fantastic as well. That's pretty much the main language of Zimbabwe. Most people are Shona, with one big city, Bulawayo, being Ndebele, and they speak that, and so Shona is the main language for most of the people. They'd say, how are you? So they say Makadi, and you clap your hands as, like, in this way, as a sign of respect. And so Makadi, which is how are you, and you say Tiribo, which is I'm fine. Wait, I think I might be mixing languages. Let me think. Makadi, Tiribo. Yeah, this is gonna be bad. People are gonna make fun of me. But people will say shop, which is sharp, but because of the accent, it sounds like SHOP. It just means, like, cool. Ndebele, the other language, I remember a little bit better, just because I was really passionate about learning that one because it was fun for me to speak. And so you say Salibonani, which is, you know, how are you? And you say Yebo. Yebo is yes. But you say Yebo for a lot of different things. You say yes to, like, they say hello and you go yes. So Salibonani, Yebo unjani baba. You go Niapila unjani mama. And, you know, and you can saying I'm fine, how are you? And then you can, it depends on how well you're learning it and the accent. And occasionally, if you're speaking to someone respectful, you change it up, and, you know, you say it in a more I guess appropriate way. And my tabasa in Shona, I think, is probably one of the coolest ways to say thank you. In Malawi, Chichewa, you say Zikomo, which I think is also really cool. But then the fun things about Ndebele is there's some words that click, and so you ask the members to teach you little rhymes, you know. So I was asking them to teach me, and they say, okay, say Kumukatu get Ukatu. I go, what? And they say Kumukatu get Ukatu. Like, I'm like, okay, how about Ama Koko? I'm like, no. And so it's a lot of fun. It's hard to get used to. You have to learn that when it's written down, Q is, and X is, and C is, and even within there's like different ways of saying those. And another syllable is it's HL, so it's hlope. So you're like, I'm hlope, and it sounds like you got a lot of spit, you know, in the side of your mouth, and it's just it's funny. It's with most languages is, you know, you'll say something that you're trying to copy exactly what this person says, but because you're saying it with a weird accent, you're doing it completely wrong, and it's fun. And the best part is when you're able like I would really recommend learning at least greetings, because starting off respectfully talking to someone on the street and saying "Salibonani, mama," she's so much more willing to listen to you if you have taken the time to learn something about her culture and her language. And usually they love it. They go, "Look at this Marungu, speaking Shona," or "Look at this Kiwa." And so it's it was a lot of fun. I loved speaking those languages. Eventually, when you get so into it that your accent starts to disappear and you're speaking theirs, they love it even more. I would have some of the investigators we would teach. I would knock on the door, and I'd speak, and he'd open the door and he'd say, "That sounded just like a Zimbabwean. I'm so proud of you." And I'd be like, "Cool." I'd feel good about myself. But yeah, I loved Shona and Ndebele, Chewa. No, they were fun to speak. It is a former British colony. It was called Rhodesia. So people there, you will find similar to British accents, but it's definitely its own version, because it's a combination of African accent and English. And so let's see if I can still do this. It would when I would meet people, they're like, "Elder, how are you today?" Like, "Oh, I'm fine, sister. How are you?" "Oh, it is so good to see you." And coming from North Carolina, I didn't quite talk like this, but I would speak, and my words would run together sometimes, and it was just a simple Southern American accent. So going there, no one would be able to understand me because I would speak too quickly in that accent, and so I had to learn to stop and enunciate all of my syllables. And this is how I spoke for 2 years, to the point when I called home for Christmas, and my family goes, "What is wrong with the way you're speaking?" And I went, what are you talking about? You're talking like this." Well, I had to, because that was the only way that I could be understood. So I guess when you meet people on the street, you go, "Hi, how are you?" And they say, "I'm fine, how are you?" And so lots of kids, when they see you on the street, all they've been taught to say is, "How are you?" and "I'm fine." So they'll follow you for 20 minutes. "How are you? How are you? How are you?" And you go, "I'm fine." "How are you?" "I'm fine." "I'm fine." "How are you?" Like, okay, all right, this is not getting anywhere, but it's entertaining to see them do that. Sometimes it's frustrating, but most of the time it's entertaining. So a lot of the words are similar to British words, like so we would say cookie, they would say biscuit. I didn't know that the front of the car that I call the hood is called the bonnet. Did not know that. Or that the trunk is called the boot. And so that took me a little while. They also drive on the left side of the street in Zimbabwe. So because it is British, and so that took a little while, especially learning to shift with my left hand when driving. That was interesting, because all the cars are manual. Let's see. But the languages there that they have other than English. So like when you greet someone, it's a typical conversation. I guess the accent is a little bit different. We always loved to try and do our best President Dube impersonations, and we'd go, "Elders, I want you to know that the gospel is important," and we loved it. And then when he spoke in General Conference it was about a year and a half ago now, I think, and he goes, "My mother told me," and I just went, yes, it's been so long since I've heard that accent. It made me, I can't tell you how happy that made me. I'm really grateful that I've been given an opportunity to speak about the time I spent in Zimbabwe. Those experiences have not only just, it's cliche, but you say, it's made you who you are today. But, if nothing else, it reminds me that those experiences were tailor-made for me. And for every missionary, wherever you go, and whoever you meet, and who your companion is, that's an experience that I swear, like those 2 years are specifically made to challenge and strengthen and break and make you. going to Zimbabwe was the exact place and time and circumstances that I needed to grow. And I'm grateful that I get to talk about that, because it helps remind me that I was so happy in those days. And I am happy now, but those days were, I couldn't take a smile off my face sometimes, because I had a purpose. I was serving God, and I was helping people, and I felt fulfilled, and I was full of the Spirit, and I was reading my scriptures, and it was great. And so anybody that serves a mission, I'm sure, can relate to that. And so those who are going on a mission, or those who are back from their mission, know that where you're going is important and for you. And remember that where you went, if you are a return missionary, think about it and remind yourself about how that was. Because when I think about Zimbabwe, it makes me want to be better and be more like the kind of guy I was then, and not go back to how I was years and years ago. So I guess just a mission is a calling from God to lift yourself up and be better. And don't take that for granted, and don't let it be a 2-year trip. It's not that. It is a mission. It is a quest in the name of God. And so don't forget that.
What was the most exotic food you had in Zimbabwe?
That would definitely be mupani worms, or madora, maklimbi, the caterpillars. Those guys they're fun.
What was one of the most crazy or dangerous experiences you had?
I would have to say it was self-induced danger. We got to go to a zoo, and they let us pet the lions. So I got to stick my hand through the chain link fence and scratch a lion behind the ear. So don't tell my mom.
What was one of the most spiritual experiences you had, or a time you felt the Spirit really strong?
It was after a baptism, when one of the people we baptized got up and was bearing his testimony. His very simple and emotional testimony was possibly one of the times I've been closest to the Spirit. It was it wasn't elaborate and it wasn't well said, but it was very heartfelt.
Any funny language mistake that you made, or any other missionary made, that you can remember?
I can't think of any translation errors, but I can definitely think of pronunciation, where it's the members would laugh and we would laugh, if especially if you're trying to say something with a click and it just fails. So instead of making a sound like, they make a sound like.
What was one of the greatest life lessons you learned on your mission?
Patience in a lot of things in life. Recognizing that every time you go in and teach a lesson, even if you've got the Spirit, it's not going to necessarily be that point in time when they change a life, or maybe it won't even change, but accepting God's time rather than your own. I learned that.
What was the best skill or ability that you developed or gained as a missionary?
Yeah, the ability to get into a completely new situation and be comfortable with it. It might not be your favorite place in the world, and it might not be your favorite situation. Maybe the stress between you and a companion, or you and the ward, but the ability to keep persevering and knowing that you're doing what you should be doing. That's a hard thing to do.
Most extreme weather you experienced?
So, other than the heat, which can be pretty bad at times, so bad that it'll burn the top of my scalp and split open the head. The most extreme weather is about 2 months out of the year it rains. And when it rains, it rains. And my companion and I went home with water up past our knees multiple times. And we'd get home, we'd have to dry out our scriptures and all the other things. So when it rains, it pours.
What was one of the hardest things that you went through or experienced on your mission?
The hardest thing for me was watching people that had made such huge changes in their lives go back on the repentance and the things that they'd done. It was really hard watching people that you had come to love fall and give up.
What's the best advice you could give to a missionary just heading out to the field?
I mean, other than your typical know your Book of Mormon, read from PMG, I would say the biggest thing you can do is make sure that you have your own experiences and your own testimony and your own connection with God. Because going out there, you can always learn lessons, you can always learn from your companions, but your own testimony and spirit needs to be strong when you go out.
Finally, what's the best advice you could give to a returned missionary just getting home from their mission?
I would say don't lose contact with the people that you were at home with. Thank goodness for Facebook, and I get messages from some people in Zimbabwe all the time. But as for getting used to being back here, strive as long as you can to make sure that you're doing the habits that you promised yourself you would when you were leaving your mission. That you said, I'm going to go home and do this. Make sure you do it. And ask someone to help you make sure you do it. Because those of us who have failed would love to make sure that you succeed. Well, first off, let me just tell you how incredibly blessed you are to be asked by God to go to Zimbabwe and help people there learn about the gospel. It is the greatest experience you will have, at least that I've had in my entire life. I mean, you are going to a place where people want to hear from you and they cannot wait to meet you. You're going to a place that has been dedicated to preach the gospel, and it is an amazing place. And the people there are the most amazing people you will ever meet. They're the most loving people. They will help you and they will guide you and you will guide them, and it'll be amazing. There's a scripture in Mosiah that's going to apply to your life, and it's Mosiah 18:30. And it talks about waters of Mormon, and it talks about the land of Mormon, but it talks about how people that learned the gospel there treasured it for the rest of their lives, and it made a huge impact. And next to that scripture in my Book of Mormon, I wrote down, and I wrote Zimbabwe right next to it, because that is where I learned the gospel. And that is where I really have my testimony of Jesus Christ. And you're going to have that same opportunity. So I can't tell you how jealous and excited I am that you get to go there. And make the most of it. Don't let there be a day in which you get so self-absorbed that you forget that you're not there for yourself, that you're for these other people. And the happiness will come with that. So I think one of the things that I wish I had learned a little bit earlier as a missionary, especially in Zimbabwe, is because people are so willing to listen and so friendly and willing to sit down and hear the gospel, I got jaded, I guess, at a point where I wouldn't give everyone an opportunity to hear, because I would assume this person is joking, because they're not serious, because that would happen a lot. Some people would you'd teach them for weeks, but they would never seriously want to join or even open their heart to listen. They wanted you to come in and talk to them, that's all. And I regret getting jaded, because I should still have given everyone the opportunity. I was walking down the street one day with one of my companions, and this woman comes off and she goes, "Missionaries, come here, I need to talk to you." And she said it in a way that my first thought was, oh, this woman, is just here to mess with us. Let's keep walking. Let's not waste our time. But my companion who I will praise to to my dying day, was much closer to the Spirit than I, and much more loving than I, says, no, let's go and listen to what she has to say. And so we go back and we sit down with her and we're like, hi, how can we help you? And, and she said, well, I was just talking with my neighbor about this dream I had last night. And in the dream, I was met by two people in white that I thought were angels that had come to talk to me. They said they had something really important for me. And I was asking my neighbor just now, what does she think that means? And the neighbor says, I don't know, but there's some two guys in white right down there. Why don't you ask them? So then she ran out on the street and she flagged us down. And it's one of those times when you find somebody who's just been completely waiting to hear the gospel. And I almost didn't answer. In fact, I chose not to answer that. And thank goodness we work in companionships. So because there's so many people there, you just have to give them all the chance. And she became one of my favorite people in the church. Sister Nguenio is fantastic. I loved her. I still love her. And I would say, don't let that happen like I almost did. I guess there's the uniqueness of Zimbabwe is that you should open your mouth at all times. There are always days when you're feeling, self-absorbed and sad, or, maybe an investigator has bailed on you and it's just depressing. Because people are so willing to listen, it's a crime not to open your mouth and share it with everybody who will listen. That's what President Dube worked with us on very much. We contacted hundreds of people a week, because sometimes it's as simple as just saying, hey, we want to invite you to church, and someone will show up that week and it'll change their life. So open your mouth and be willing to talk with anybody you see. Something really fantastic about Zimbabweans is the young men, like around 16 to like 19, they have lots of free time and they love spending it with the missionaries. You will have a few branch missionaries at all times that you can call upon to go out and teach with you. And some of them became my best friends. I served close with guys like Blessing and Tawanda and Tafadzwa and Mpoutle, and these guys would just, it was fantastic to serve with them because they were basically like a third missionary, except these guys can relate very closely with everybody you teach because they live there and they might know them. And I guess what a little bit of advice would be, just make sure you're polite and you don't screw up the relationship with those guys, because you miss out on opportunities of friendship and growth. And those are the people that I talk to most still from Zimbabwe, is because my testimony with them grew just like theirs with me grew, and those relationships are some of the most important. One of the greatest things is to see someone that you taught alongside getting their own mission call, and seeing them go out. So yeah, I guess that would be something.